All right, how's it going, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Another long form video where I talk over gameplay because you know why. I've just been posting a lot of shorts, so I figured I'd throw some long form content in, and I just ran another 5K. So I think it's good for me to get a little inspired and balance out the scales because it's easy to post shorts, but it takes a real type of person to balance out the scales because there's some people out there who still want to watch something that's longer than maximum 3 minutes or 60 seconds. So to those of you who want that, this one's for you. But we are talking about social media, and honestly, how I don't think overall it's the problem, because here's the thing. I see post after post of people saying they're leaving social media. There's even a really funny sketch by one of those guys that talked about and gave every archetypical, I don't think that's a word, but you know what I'm saying, every archetype of when someone says oh, I'm quitting social media, it's toxic. I don't think social media is necessarily the problem. I think, honestly, and hear me out before, I get a whole bunch of shade thrown my way. I think the way we handle it is the problem, and I think that there's people who handle social media very responsibly, and then there's people I know who are irresponsible with it. And now maybe there are some people with impulse control problems, yeah, but I do firmly believe that there's people who have, impulse control and who do the responsible thing and still probably just don't want it because they just don't use it. And you know what? I'm not saying that doesn't exist. There's a lot of different cases. Everyone's story is different. But at least in my personal opinion, the people I know in person, one in particular who got so wrapped up into the I'll show them behavior of social media that I literally had to block him on not just social media, but the phone number because the guy crashed out so hard. In my experience, it's usually the people who just can't stop staring into the abyss of what I call the shadow side of social media that honestly have to get off. And you know what? I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I think we all have our different triggers and our different things like that. But at least from my experience, a lot of the people who have deleted it have ended up using it for what I call the wrong reasons. Always having to get into debates, always having to get an ego boost, always having to have it fill some void that's in their life. And that does exist. Not saying that's everybody, but I've also seen so many examples of people who keep social media, and it's the ones that keep social media that use it to advertise their business, stay in touch with loved ones, so they don't have to flood their phone with contacts, right? Instant messaging, all that stuff, very business formal, know how to use it strictly for business and keep, things like politics, religion out of it. Because that's the thing is the way I know that social media could really spiral into the dark side is when you bring up things like religion and politics. And since we're talking about the dark side, I will say maybe the Star Wars entertainment you do or do not like. I've actually honestly gone back and forth and watched some debates over Star Wars Acolyte or whatever. And I want to chime in and post, but I just realize that people get divisive over things as trivial as Star Wars, and I guess entertainment just can't be subjective anymore. So, obviously I have opinions on different shows and everything like that, but I don't think it's worth getting into a debate on Facebook an entire evening when I could be, making videos talking about me not getting in debates on Facebook. But I'm going to segue with what I came up with in my last long-term video of Raha Jackson. How we use these platforms is 110% our responsibility. How we start to portray ourselves moving forward, even if you were portraying yourself pretty bad in the past, I do believe that there's always a time to repent and move forward in a better way. But there comes a time where you got to stop blaming the tool and start blaming the individual using the tool. It's like a power drill almost. It's I could either use a power drill for what it was meant for, or I could use it to pop my own tires on my car. No, I'm not suggesting anybody do that. Do not do that, please. I'm just using hyperbole to make a point. So, disclaimer, do not use a drill for any nefarious purposes at all. Use tools the way they are meant to be used. But I start to see a cycle with at least the people I've seen who have gone into the darker ends and the toxicity and the debates of social media and have, had to delete all of it. Mainly because they just, even the guy that I know that got so locked into political debates that it literally put a riff in our friendship, because he was literally bringing his phone to me, having me proofread his sentences like, he cared so much about it. Like, the guy honestly still has PTSD from those days, even today. And I hang out with him from time to time, but I limit it because it's almost like you never thought that Facebook was going to have the same effect as Vietnam. But like I said, that's completely down to the individual at some point. The people I see staying on it are the ones who are completely using it for the good purposes. And to the people who have used it for bad purposes or have posted things where they realize they're not proud of it, which I think honestly is all of us. I mean, I remember Facebook came out when I was super young, and when I was in high school, we were a bunch of edgelords. And, if I could go back at my younger self and see how he used to use Facebook, I would probably be being that parent figure that I never had supervising me when it came to Facebook or any social media at that point, because when you're young, you think it's like a free-for-all. And I've seen younger kids who get on with it, and I forgive them for the transgressions that they're about to go after, because it's like we've all been that young at one point, and we all thought something was cool that we look back now and we realize, okay, that was just cringe on our part. And you know what? I think that's the younger years. You commit the cringe, and then in the later years, you just are like, okay, that was that. How do we move forward better? But I think that the people getting off of social media need to, if they need to take a break, okay, because sometimes you do need to take a step back. Where am I going with this, and what's the overall solution? Why do I think it's the solution? Okay, so here's the thing. There's always going to be people who are using it for the quote-unquote dark sides of the internet, right? Like all the behaviors that we see in social media that, get magnified and just are the reasons why a lot of people have to get off. And it's not just all down to impulse control, but like I said, in my experience, there are a lot of people who just can't help themselves and have to get locked into it. But I honestly think that even if you don't have a huge presence online, I think it's very important to be a good example of how to use it, because you got to be the change you want to see. Because the sad news is social media is such a blessing when you think about it. So many ways to connect, so many ways to advertise, so many ways to do good and help each other out. Yet we have a lot of bad apples out there that have basically made the orchard half rotten. But it's super important that I think the people who can be good reflections of social media culture stay on here, because I think that if we were to all just quit and then let, all the toxicity run rampant, then we're really not helping this whole battle for what the internet should be. Because there's areas in the world where, they would be grateful to be able to use the internet. There's places in the world that are pretty underdeveloped and don't have access to that. And especially me being here in American society, you realize how much we take for granted. You realize how much goes to waste, and it's kind of sad. So I feel more obligated to use it and use it to spread good messages and use it to entertain now, because it's like all that obligation, all that wanting to be the counterculture. I think that that's super valuable, because like I said, even if you don't have a big following or you're not like Jake Paul levels of status, right? I still believe it's important that you at least try to be a reflection just for like maybe 5 or 10 people. Because even if like you're not the biggest influencer out there, you'd be surprised if everybody chipped in a little bit, how much of a difference realistically we could all make when it comes to that culture. And yes, the vampires of social media are always going to be there. There's not going to be a permanent fix. But if we could be the sunlight rays that push the social media vampires into their social media caves, then I honestly believe that that would be at least a good enough start to make an authentic difference, and that it actually shines through and people start to notice it. Because, the world's not stopping. The internet's always going to be there. But you'd be surprised how little effort it takes in the battle for this thing. And it's amazing how a lot of people would actually just rather give up than, let it become, and kind of let it become worse than actually just pitch in a little bit and try to be a positive influence or try to be a positive brand. Because honestly, I will say something. Although I know some of those, motivational TikToks and everything like that, I know they're not 100% realistic, but I'd rather look at that than a bunch of black pill and doom scrolling all day, because that puts me in a more positive mindset to get things done. And it makes me want to kind of really pass that one forward. So, basically where I'm going with this, don't quit social media. If you are thinking about quitting, you probably just want to take a break. And that's okay. Sometimes we need to. And if you do, maybe you come back and not take part in the impulses that you are complaining about. Not saying that you are, but in my opinion, and from what I've seen, a lot of the people who complain about the quote-unquote toxicity were the ones actively taking part in it nonstop. But no matter what your backstory is, when you come back, please be a positive influence. Be a good light. Spread good messages. Spread wisdom. Spread love. And don't hate, but appreciate. And be grateful that you have access to the internet, because, like I said, I think out here in America, we get so kind of out of touch with the rest of the world where we forget how grateful someone else halfway across the world would be to swap places with us, because we get so hung up on social media. But that's what I gotta say. I just wanted to get that video out there because this topic was lingering over my mind. I didn't know really how to format it, so I thought I'd just get it out there in a really authentic way. But I'll see you guys on the next one, and be the change you want to see. But peace out. Later.